So what we're doing today is we're going to do a tissue culture onto an agar plate of some mushrooms that my friend Lindsay found for us while foraging. This is the red reishi, or Ganoderma lucidium. Typically, when I do a culture of a mushroom, I'll go from the base of the stem away from the cap, because the cap is where all of the spores are. So if you want to do an exact genetic replica, a clone of any type of mushroom, you really want to be away from the cap so that you don't by accident get any spores into your culture, because then you're not really doing a clone anymore. You're you could possibly be growing out a mycelium network from spores. In this case, we just have caps, so we're just going to go with a tissue culture from a cap anyways. And what I want to do is break this cap open and take a culture out from the center of the cap, or if you were trying to do an exact replica, you would do the same thing with the stem, break the stem open. That's where you're going to find the most sterile area to do your tissue culture and help prevent from getting any contaminations in. So I've got a little tweezers here. Sometimes I use a tweezer, sometimes I don't. I'm going to take a flame. You can also use a back tie sterilizer, and as long as the metal gets red hot, we're good to go. And I'm going to lay this on my little tray, making sure that doesn't touch anything so we can get contaminated. Same thing with the scalpel, you want it nice and red hot. And I'm going to let that cool off in front of the flow hood. Some people will dip that in a denatured alcohol to cool it off. As long as you have a good flow hood, it can sit there and it'll cool off on its own. I'll get my plates ready. I've already sprayed down the area with alcohol. It's important to keep a nice, clean, sterile area, and between every few actions, get your hands nice and clean. And I'm going to take this big fat one right here. I'm going to break this. And I'm looking at the inside of the stemmer cap, and that's where I want to take my liquid or my culture from. Typically I wouldn't talk while I'm doing this procedure because the air from my breath is fighting against the flow hood. So when I'm doing tissue cultures, liquid cultures, anything of that sort, I usually don't talk, but for the sake of this video, of course, we're going to have to talk. Now what I'm going to do now is use my scalpel and take a section out of the center. It doesn't have to be big. Like half the size of a kernel of rice is enough. And if it's too much, you risk putting too many contaminants into your agar. So that tiny piece right there is more than enough. When I put it on my plate, I'm going to use a technique called clamshelling, where I'm going to just open it briefly, pressing that tissue sample in the center of the agar, closing it up right away. So that's what this tissue culture looks like. Now, more than likely, since this came out of the wild, we just brought in a bunch of contamination as well. So when you do these tissue cultures, what I would do at the next step is, if there is contamination in the plate, I would find areas that grow of mycelium that grow out from the tissue, cut those areas out and start a new plate. So this is a oyster tissue sample that we did earlier, and you can see here, that's the little tissue in the center. It's starting to myceliate already. Here's a pearl oyster, and you can see here as it starts to grow out. It should always grow out from where you put your tissue culture. If you see any specks around the tissue culture, it's most likely contamination. And you'd want to go back in under flow hood, open up your dish, and take out the good sections and start a new dish, so that you'll get eventually a nice clean plate. This is a really nice clean plate with no contaminations. Another technique, we'll do this as well, is let's take another piece, we'll break it open. This time I'm going to put a tissue sample on 3 different locations of the plate, under the Open? Cool. So there's a couple different layers that I can choose from, and again, typically I don't cut from the cap, I'll cut from the body. Let me lay this on my dish that's been cleaned. I'm going to re-sterilize my knife here. And I'm going to take a couple different sections from this cap. I'm going to place it on 3 different areas of the Petri dish. And then I will expand my Petri dish out to whatever area gives us the cleanest tissue sample, the cleanest mycelium. So I can tell here that those look like polypore gills. And I am going to get some spore in this, but that's fine because all I have is the cap, so we'll go with that. I'm just looking for a little tiny piece. Fine. Do a clamshell technique. Put it in one corner now. Okay. Clean up that knife again. In this case, I'll do one more sample from a different part of the cap. But you don't want to do the surface, you want to do the inside. The insides, you have a much better chance of having less contaminations. There you go. I'm actually just going to do 2. One on both sides of the plate. And then between the 2, I should get some good mycelium. The next step is I will make a little cutout and expand the plate. And I'll do a video on plate expansion. The last part I'm going to do here is use some parafilm. When you use parafilm to cover this plate, I can walk it around and not worry about getting the plate contaminated. You never want to cut parafilm because it's hard to take apart. Just rip it. That makes it easier for you to tear the parafilm apart, fold it in half. Wrapping initially is tough, but once you get it, it's super easy. You're going to wrap the parafilm. And you don't want to stretch it too much because it will start to break. And you don't want to stretch it not enough because you want enough to cover the seam. And that's it. That's a safe plate. We're going to let it myceliate. Once it does myceliate the plate fully, we can store it in the fridge upside down for a long time. That's a tissue sample.